Tim, alcoholic. Okay, guys, we are on page 44. We are going to be taking step 2 tonight. Chapter 4, we agnostics. In the preceding chapters, you have learned something of alcoholism. We hope we have made clear the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. That's where we spoke about the moderate and the heavy drinker, hard drinker, as opposed to one that is beyond human aid. If, I use this as my definition for alcoholism, alcoholic. If, when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, meaning stop and stay stopped, and that's the mental portion of our disease, or if when drinking you have little control over the amount you take, that's the physical part, the phenomenon of craving, you are probably alcoholic. If that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. To one who feels he is an atheist or agnostic, such an experience seems impossible. But to continue as he is means disaster, especially if he is an alcoholic of the hopeless variety. To be doomed to an alcoholic death or to live on a spiritual basis are not always easy alternatives to face. But it isn't so difficult. About half, meaning 50%, of our original fellowship were exactly of that type. What type? The type of an alcoholic of a hopeless variety, and they were debating whether they should be doomed to an alcoholic death or live on a spiritual basis, because these are not always easy alternatives to face. So 50% came like that. At first, some of us tried to avoid the issue, hoping against hope we were not true alcoholics, because if you're not a true alcoholic, you don't have to buy into the spiritual thing. Self-will will work. But after a while, we had to face the fact that we must find a spiritual basis of life or else. Perhaps it is going to be that way with you. But cheer up. Something like half, this is a different measurement, something like half, 50% of us thought we were atheists or agnostics. Two different measurements. Our experience shows you need not be disconcerted. If a mere code of morals or a better philosophy of life were sufficient to overcome alcoholism, many of us would have recovered long ago. But we found that such codes and philosophies did not save us, no matter how much we tried. We could wish, meaning self-will, we could wish to be moral. We could wish to be philosophically comforted. In fact, we could will these things with all our might. But the needed power wasn't there, beyond human aid. Our human resources, as marshaled by the will, were not sufficient. They failed utterly. Lack of power, that was our dilemma, step 1. We had to find a power by which we could live, and it had to be a power greater than ourselves, step 2. That's backwards, see, I was pointing the wrong way. Obviously, but where and how were we to find this power? Well, that's exactly what this book is about. Its main object is to enable you to find a power, capital P, greater than yourself, which will solve your problem. After this point, it will always talk plural, right? So our problem is we need to get on board first with the spiritual basis. That's our problem. After that, the power will solve all of our problems. That means we have written a book which we believe to be spiritual as well as moral. And it means, of course, that we are going to talk about God. Here, difficulty arises with agnostics. Latin for without knowledge. Without knowledge. Really, you're not taking a position either way. You're just saying, I don't know. Many times we talk to a new man and watch his hopes rise as we discuss his alcoholic problems and explain our fellowship. But his face falls when we speak of spiritual matters, especially when we mention God. For we have reopened a subject which our man thought he had neatly evaded or entirely ignored. We know how he feels. We have shared his honest doubt and prejudice. Some of us have been violently anti-religious. To others, the word God brought up a particular idea of him, with which someone had tried to impress them during childhood. Perhaps we rejected this particular conception because it seemed inadequate, appeared inadequate. With the rejection, we imagined we had abandoned the God idea entirely. We only thought we abandoned the God idea. We didn't actually. We're going to see the authors really do touch on that very well on page 55. We were bothered with the thought that faith, meaning belief, and dependence, meaning trust. So faith is a philosophical question. We can talk about it. Dependence is a verb. You prove it. You do it. You don't say, I trust in God, because you have to then list the 6 things that you did to prove that you trust in God. You can say you believe in God, right? 2 different things. One's used as a noun, one's used as a verb. Steps 1, 2, and 3, all noun. It's the discussion. Steps 4 through 12, you're doing something. Completely different. Why do we lose so many people at 4? It's the first time you have to pick up a pen. I don't know where I left off. The faith and dependence upon a power beyond ourselves was somewhat weak, even cowardly. We looked upon this world of warring individuals, warring theological systems, and inexplicable calamity with deep skepticism. We looked askance, meaning suspiciously. We looked askance at many individuals who claimed to be godly. How could a supreme being have anything to do with it all? And who could comprehend a supreme being anyhow? Yet, in other moments, we found ourselves thinking, when enchanted by a starlit night, who then made all this? There was a feeling of awe and wonder, but it was fleeting and soon lost. Yes, we of agnostic temperament have had these thoughts and experiences. Let us make haste to reassure you. We found that as soon as we were able to lay aside prejudice and express even a willingness to believe in a power greater than ourselves, we commenced to get results, even though it was impossible for any of us to fully define or comprehend that power, which is God. Much to our relief, we discovered we did not need to consider another's conception of God. Our own conception, however inadequate, was sufficient to make the approach and to effect a contact with him. As soon as we admitted the possible existence of a creative intelligence, a spirit of the universe, underlying the totality of things, we began to be possessed of a new sense of power and direction, provided we took other simple steps. So the possessed part is finding a purpose. The new sense of power is finding the purpose. And as long as we have an open-mindedness that this is possible, we will start the process. We found that God does not make too hard terms with those who seek him. To us, the realm of spirit is broad, roomy, all-inclusive, never exclusive or forbidding to those who earnestly seek. It is open, we believe, to all men, even if you claim to be an atheist. When, therefore, we speak to you of God, we mean your own conception of God. This applies too to other spiritual expressions which you find in this book, So I underline that, and I underline that because that will always remain the case. It's your conception. It's not the sponsor's conception. It's not what we're interpreting out of the book. It's your own conception. Whatever your own conception is, that's correct. You could never debate somebody on that. Do not let any prejudice you may have against spiritual terms deter you from honestly asking yourself what they mean to you. At the start, this was all we needed to commence spiritual growth, to effect our first conscious relation with God as we understood Him. Afterward, we found ourselves accepting many things which then seemed entirely out of reach. That was growth, but if we wished to grow, we had to begin somewhere. So we used our own conception, however limited it was. All right, for those looking for step 2 in the text here it is. We needed to ask ourselves but one short question. Do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe, that there is a power greater than myself? As soon as a man can say that he does believe, or is willing to believe, we emphatically assure him that he is on his way. It has been repeatedly proven among us that upon this simple cornerstone, a wonderfully effective spiritual structure can be built. Note, bottom of the page. Please be sure to read Appendix 2 on spiritual experience. Let's go ahead and do that. Page 567, if you're in a 4th edition. And then as soon as we read this, we're going to take the step together, whether you want to or not. Okay, spiritual experience. The terms spiritual experience and spiritual awakening are used many times in this book, which, upon careful reading, shows that the personality change, meaning the psychic change, sufficient to bring about recovery from alcoholism, has manifested itself among us in many different forms. Who here has not had a spiritual experience? That's right. Everybody who didn't drink today, that's a spiritual experience. That's a miracle. Because we're beyond human aid. Yet it is true that our first printing gave many readers the impression that these personality changes or religious experiences must be in the nature of sudden and spectacular upheavals. Happily for everyone, this conclusion is erroneous. In the first few chapters, a number of sudden revolutionary changes are described. Though it was not our intention to create such an impression, many alcoholics have nevertheless concluded that in order to recover, they must acquire an immediate and overwhelming God consciousness, followed at once by a vast change in feeling and outlook. Among our rapidly growing membership of thousands of alcoholics, such transformations, though frequent, are by no means the rule. Most of our experiences are what the psychologist William James calls the educational variety, because they develop slowly over a period of time. Quite often, friends of the newcomer are aware of the difference long before he is himself. He finally realizes that he has undergone a profound alteration in his reaction to life, that such a change could hardly have been brought about by himself alone. What often takes place in a few months could seldom have been accomplished by years of self-discipline, self-will. With few exceptions, our members find that they have tapped an unsuspected inner resource, which they presently identify with their own conception of a power greater than themselves. Most of us think this awareness of a power greater than ourselves is the essence of spiritual experience. So it doesn't have to be white light. It's just the awareness of the power that's greater than ourselves. Our more religious members call it God consciousness. Most emphatically, we wish to say that any alcoholic capable of honestly facing his problems in the light of our experience can recover, provided he does not close his mind to all spiritual concepts, open-mindedness, willingness. He can only be defeated by an attitude of intolerance or belligerent denial. we find that no one need have difficulty with the spirituality of the program. Willingness, honesty, and open-mindedness are the essentials of recovery. But these are indispensable. Often we talk, Pete brought this up a couple of weeks ago, often we talk about the how of the program. This is the who of the program. WHO, willingness, honesty, open-mindedness. And then we have the quote, there is a principle which is a bar against all information, which is proof against all arguments, and which cannot fail to keep a man in everlasting ignorance. That principle is contempt prior to investigation, and here it is assigned to Herbert Spencer, but we've learned that it's not Herbert Spencer, it's William Paley. William Paley. And this quote was in someone's story in a past edition, which had been removed. Someone decided it was a wonderful quote to leave in the book. They pulled out the quote. Somebody didn't research it. That's it. Okay, so you guys stay tight. We're going to do step 2. We're on page 47 again. Second paragraph. I'm going to change that statement on the second line into a question. Your answer will be yes or silence. And then you'll call your sponsor. Do you now believe, or are you even willing to believe, that there is a power greater than yourself?
Yes.
Well, you just took step 2, so. All right. Sometimes I think people make a real big deal about how you get through the steps, but okay. Third paragraph. That was great news to us, for we had assumed we could not make use of spiritual principles unless we accepted many things on faith, which seemed difficult to believe. When people presented us with spiritual approaches, how frequently did we all say, I wish I had what that man has. I am sure it would work if I could only believe as he believes. But I cannot accept as surely true the many articles of faith which are so plain to him. So it was comforting to learn that we could commence at a simpler level. What's the simpler level? Merely being willing to believe. Besides a seeming, it appears, besides a seeming inability to accept much on faith, we often found ourselves handicapped by obstinacy, sensitiveness, and unreasoning prejudice. Those are all shortcomings. Many of us have been so touchy that even casual reference to spiritual things made us bristle with antagonism, which means hostility, right? This sort of thing had to be abandoned. For those of you who like to count musts in the book, that counts as one. Had to be abandoned, must abandon. Though some of us resisted, we found no great difficulty in casting aside such feelings. Why? Faced with alcoholic destruction, we soon became as open-minded on spiritual matters as we had tried to be on other questions. So the point they're making is you're forced into it through your bottom. You're forced, there's our gift of desperation. The gift is the fact that your circumstances, your situation is so hopeless and helpless that you are now faced with alcoholic destruction. It's your gift. Because that's what made you open-minded to the spiritual question. In this respect, alcohol was a great persuader. It finally beat us into a state of reasonableness. Sometimes this was a tedious process. In other words, the bottom got lower and lower and lower and lower, right? We hope no one else will be as prejudiced for as long as some of us were. And prejudice there means resist. Don't resist. Just follow the plan. The reader may still ask why he should believe in a power greater than himself. We think there are good reasons. Let us have a look at some of them. The practical individual of today is a stickler for facts and results. Nevertheless, the 20th century readily accepts theories of all kinds, provided they are firmly grounded in fact. We have numerous theories, for example, about electricity. Everyone believes them without a murmur of doubt. Why this ready acceptance? Because of open-mindedness. Why this ready acceptance? Because of open mind. I'm not prejudiced against it. I think I hit that switch and the light's going to go on. I don't know how it works. I don't even care. So I don't debate it. Simply because it is impossible to explain what we see, feel, direct, and use without a reasonable assumption as a starting point. I make the reasonable assumption that when I hit that switch, that light's going to come on. Everybody nowadays believes in scores of assumptions for which there is good evidence, but no perfect visual proof. And does not science demonstrate that visual proof is the weakest proof? It is being constantly revealed, as mankind studies the material world, that outward appearances are not inward reality at all. To illustrate, the prosaic steel girder, meaning the ordinary, the prosaic steel girder is a mass of electrons whirling around each other at incredible speed. These tiny bodies are governed by precise laws, and these laws hold true throughout the material world. Science tells us so. We have no reason to doubt it. When, however, the perfectly logical assumption is suggested that underneath the material world and life as we see it, there is an all-powerful, capital A, capital P, guiding, capital G, creative intelligence, right there our perverse streak comes to the surface, and we laboriously set out to convince ourselves it isn't so. So all-powerful, guiding, and creative intelligence are just another words for higher power. Perverse streak, it's our stubborn streak. Stubborn streak. We read wordy books and indulge in windy arguments, thinking we believe this universe needs no God to explain it. Were our contentions true, it would follow that life originated out of nothing, means nothing, and proceeds nowhere. Instead of regarding ourselves as intelligent agents, spearheads of God's ever-advancing creation, we agnostics and atheists chose to believe that our human intelligence was the last word, the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and end of all. Rather vain of us, wasn't it? So if you can choose to believe that the human intelligence was the last word, was the top power, then you can choose to be willing to believe that that's not true. So when somebody says, oh, I can't believe in that, not true. You can choose to believe in that. It's within your power. You can just get on the other side of the line in the sand that you drew. We who have traveled this dubious path beg you to lay aside prejudice, even against organized religion. We have learned that whatever the human frailties of various faiths may be, those faiths have given purpose and direction to millions. People of faith have a logical idea of what life is all about. Actually, we used to have no reasonable conception whatever. So he's making the point that people that live in a spiritual frame of mind have a logical idea of what life is all about. Anybody who does not live in that frame of mind has no reasonable conception about life whatsoever. We used to amuse ourselves by cynically dissecting spiritual beliefs and practices when we might have observed that many spiritually minded persons of all races, colors, and creeds were demonstrating a degree of stability, happiness, and usefulness which we should have sought ourselves. So what's the benefit of having a spiritual experience, a psychic change, switching and getting on board with this thing? You will have a life that is more stable, happy, and useful. Page 50. Instead, we looked at the human defects of these people and sometimes used their shortcomings as a basis of wholesale condemnation. We talked of intolerance while we were intolerant ourselves. We missed the reality and the beauty of the forest because we were diverted by the ugliness of some of its trees. We never gave the spiritual side of life a fair hearing. In our personal stories, meaning all the stories in the back of the book, plus Bill's story on page 1. In our personal stories, you will find a wide variation in the way each teller approaches and conceives of the power which is greater than himself. Whether we agree with a particular approach or conception seems to make little difference. Experience has taught us that these are matters about which, for our purpose, we need not be worried. These are questions for each individual to settle for himself. On one proposition, however, these men and women are strikingly agreed. Every one of them has gained access to and believes in a power greater than himself. This power has, in each case, accomplished the miraculous, the humanly impossible. As a celebrated American statesman put it, let's look at the record. And Governor Alfred E. Smith was famous for that phrase. Former New York governor, 4-time New York governor. Here are thousands of men and women, worldly indeed. They flatly declare that since they have come to believe in a power greater than themselves, so that's step 2. They flatly declare that since they have come to believe in a power greater than themselves, step 2, to take a certain attitude towards that power, step 3, and to do certain simple things, step 4 through 12. There have been a revolutionary change in the way of living and thinking. In the face of collapse and despair, in the face of the total failure of their human resources, they found that a new power, peace, happiness, and sense of direction flowed into them. This happened soon after they wholeheartedly met a few simple requirements. So steps. Once confused and baffled by the seeming futility of existence, they show the underlying reasons why they were making heavy going of life. Leaving aside the drink question, they tell why living was so unsatisfactory. Why was life so unsatisfactory? Because it was unmanageable due to self-will. They show how the change came over them. When many hundreds of people are able to say that the consciousness of the presence of God is today the most important fact of their lives, they present a powerful reason why one should have faith. Stop there tonight.